February 12, 1943, Luftwaffe. Base, Taganrog. Oberst Heinrich Müller paced the length of the briefing room, his polished boots clicking against the wooden floor with irritated precision. The mood among the gathered officers was a blend of frustration and disbelief. For the third consecutive night, their forward supply depots had been hit. Nothing catastrophic, but the constant harassment was disrupting sleep, delaying reinforcements, and slowly eroding morale. Worse, it was happening despite their overwhelming air superiority. The base commander had finally called this midnight briefing to address the problem head-on, determined to end what many considered an embarrassing nuisance. Gentlemen, I refuse to accept that the mighty Luftwaffe cannot eliminate what amounts to women flying crop dusters, Müller declared, eliciting knowing chuckles from around the room. These so-called night witches are flying museum pieces, Polikarpov POWs from 1928, training aircraft made of plywood and canvas. Hauptmann Werner Richter raised his Schnapsglas in mock toast. To the brave Soviet leadership, so desperate they send their women to die in kites. The room erupted in laughter. Another officer mimicked a woman's voice, pretending to drop bombs by hand. The Reich spent millions developing the perfect night fighter, continued Müller, while the Soviets apparently raided a flying school and threw their female instructors into combat. They'll be eliminated within the month. What Oberst Müller didn't know was that at that very moment, 22-year-old Nadezhda Popova was already airborne, just beginning what would become her record-breaking 18 missions in a single night. The young navigator from Donetsk had already survived 28 of the eventual 42 direct hits her aircraft would endure throughout the war. While German officers laughed, she was methodically plotting the most efficient route between their supply dumps, determined to maximize destruction with minimal fuel consumption. Somewhere in the darkness above, her POW-2 was gliding with its engine temporarily cut, silent, invisible, and carrying enough explosives to ensure that Oberst Müller's next morning would begin with frantic damage reports rather than triumphant declarations. By dawn, she would have dropped more than 2 tons of explosives on his critical supply lines, all without a single piece of modern equipment the Germans considered essential for night operations. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, had evolved through hard-won experience and countless casualties. During the Battle of Britain, Luftwaffe night fighter losses due to weather and disorientation exceeded those from enemy action, forcing comprehensive equipment revisions. Engineers meticulously documented each death, each crash, developing countermeasures with Germanic precision. Enclosed cockpits became mandatory after 17 pilots froze to death in a single week over the English Channel. Radio communication systems were standardized after 3 mid-air collisions between friendly aircraft in the same night. Parachutes became non-negotiable when analysis revealed that 30% of pilot deaths could have been prevented with proper escape equipment. But the most critical requirement emerged from the physics of interception: minimum speed. After losing 23 aircraft attempting to engage slower targets, the Luftwaffe established 180 mph as the absolute minimum operational speed for effective night fighting. The Junkers Ju-88, their night fighter crown jewel, embodied these hard-learned principles: 300 mph top speed, a crew of 4 with specialized roles, Fuji 220 Liechtenstein radar capable of detecting targets from 2 kilometers, and twin engines generating 2,400 horsepower. Between 1940 and 1942, these aircraft destroyed 357 British bombers, proving their superiority wasn't mere boasting but operational fact. While German engineers perfected these requirements, Nadezhda Popova was proving them irrelevant on the Eastern Front. On December 8, 1942, during her 9th of what would eventually become 18 missions in a single night, she approached a German munitions depot near Rostov, with her engine throttled to whisper quiet. No radio cluttered her cockpit, only hand signals exchanged with her navigator. No parachute weighed her down. At their operational altitude of 400 meters, there simply wasn't time to deploy one. Her maximum speed of 94 adherents was barely half the German minimum, and her wooden aircraft contained not a single piece of armor plating. As anti-aircraft fire suddenly erupted around them, Popova simply cut the engine entirely, gliding the last kilometer in complete silence, invisible to both searchlights and sound detectors. She released 6 bombs directly onto the ammunition storage, banking away as the secondary explosions lit up the night sky. German incident reports later classified the attack as inexplicable and impossible to defend against, unaware that a woman in what amounted to a flying wooden crate had just defied their entire defensive doctrine. The Soviet response to German air superiority violated every principle German doctrine established as fundamental. The Polikarpov PO-2 biplane was essentially flying kindling, or plywood with wings, constructed from pine frames covered with percal fabric and held together with carpenter's glue. Its open cockpit subjected pilots to temperatures reaching -40 degrees, causing severe frostbite that left many with permanent tissue damage. Pilots often returned with eyelashes frozen together from their own breath, crystallizing in the frigid air. The aircraft carried absolutely no equipment considered essential by modern standards. No radios, communication limited to hand signals and flares. No parachutes, considered pointless given their low operational altitude. No armor whatsoever, leaving pilots completely exposed to even small arms fire. The specifications comparison was nothing short of absurd. Maximum speed, 94 mph, versus the Ju-88's 300 mph. Power from a single 100 horsepower M11 engine versus the German aircraft's 2,400 horsepower twins. Designed in 1928, making the aircraft older than many of the women flying them. Production cost approximately $5,000 compared to the Ju-88's $80,000, and manufacturing time of just 3 weeks versus 3 months for German aircraft. The idea of sending women to combat in wooden training aircraft converted to bombers with explosives manually pushed out of the cockpit by navigators seemed not just desperate, but suicidal to German military planners. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into tactical advantages during her record 18 missions in a single night. The PO-2's simplicity enabled ground crews to refuel the aircraft in just 4 minutes and reload bombs in 3, allowing Popova to land, rearm, and launch again in under 10 minutes. A turnaround time impossible for technologically complex German bombers. During her 11th sortie that night, her aircraft took direct fire from a roving German patrol, sustaining 7 bullet holes that joined the 35 already patched from previous missions. As she later explained to new recruits, canvas and wood don't explode like metal when bullets hit. They pass through without finding vital systems. If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins, that bullet would have ricocheted until it found me. Germans designed aircraft to fight their war. We designed tactics to fight ours. By landing briefly between targets, Popova could hit multiple objectives spread across 50 kilometers in a single night, while German bombers required extensive servicing after each mission. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment from January 17, 1943 concluded. The Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents an act of desperation, indicating severe pilot shortages and declining manufacturing capacity. The wooden construction and primitive equipment render these aircraft extremely vulnerable to both weather and defensive fire. The fundamental laws of aeronautics remain immutable. Speed, metal construction, and modern equipment will always defeat slow, wooden, obsolete designs in direct engagement. Operations of this nature are predicted to cease within 4 to 6 months due to unsustainable attrition rates. The technical advantages of our aircraft are unassailable. A 3.1 speed ratio, 24.1 horsepower differential, and 15.1 cost efficiency in our favor. These female night harassment raids represent a temporary morale impact only, primarily through sleep disruption, but pose no serious operational threat to Heeresgruppe Süd supply lines. Recommendation: monitor but do not prioritize special countermeasures allocation. Nah. This assessment carried the full authority of Reichsluftfahrtministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers. It was wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure. On the very night the assessment was being drafted, she was completing her 13th of 18 missions, destroying a fuel train near Taganrog, with precision bombing from just 200 meters altitude. By this point, she had survived 38 of the 42 direct hits her aircraft would endure throughout the war, becoming one of the most decorated pilots in the Soviet Air Force. German logistics officers were recording unexplainable losses at rates that directly contradicted the official assessment, with some forward bases reporting supply deliveries reduced by 40% due to these supposedly ineffective harassment raids. Popova and her comrades had turned night into a weapon more potent than any technology the Germans could deploy against them. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error in their assessment of the night witches. Their logic seemed sound. Juncker's Ju-88 night fighters flying at 300 mph versus PO2 biplanes at 94 mph created a 3.2x speed advantage that should have meant easy interception and destruction. What they critically overlooked was that effective interception requires matching speed, not just exceeding it. This created an aerodynamic paradox centered around stall speeds, the minimum speed at which an aircraft can maintain controlled flight. The Ju-88, with its heavy frame and high-performance design, stalled at approximately 120 mph, meaning it would literally fall from the sky if flying slower. The Po-2, with its large wings and light construction, operated comfortably at 80 mph and could glide at 60 mph with its engine off. The night witches deliberately flew below the German minimum survivable speed, creating an impossible scenario. German pilots had to either fly past too fast to effectively engage, or slow down and risk catastrophic stall and crash. There was no middle ground where engagement could occur. This paradox was demonstrated on September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad, when Hauptmann Werner Schmidt attempted to intercept a PO2. Schmidt reduced speed to 130 mph, his absolute minimum, while the Soviet pilot throttled back to a 70 mph glide. Schmidt's aircraft immediately displayed stall warnings, forcing him to abort the intercept. His after-action report simply stated, "Target speed below minimum engagement threshold." Understanding this physics made Nadezhda Popova virtually untouchable during her 18 missions in a single night. During her 16th sortie, she detected the approach of a German night fighter by the distinctive sound of its twin engines. She immediately throttled back to minimum power and descended to just 100 meters above the ground. The German fighter made 3 separate passes, overshooting each time as Popova deliberately slowed her aircraft to near stalling speed. On the final attempt, the German pilot approached his own stall speed, his wings visibly wobbling as aerodynamic lift began to fail. Faced with the choice of crashing or abandoning the intercept, he was forced to accelerate away. This tactic, repeated across her 18 missions that night and throughout the 42 direct hits she survived, proved the PO2's slowness was its greatest weapon. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed, and Nadezhda Popova flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated German pilots was only the first of three advantages the Night Witches possessed. Advantages that transformed their apparent weaknesses into deadly strengths. German fighter designs had been optimized for intercepting fast Soviet bombers like the Il-4 or PE-2, which cruised at speeds exceeding 250 mph. The Ju-88 and Bf-110 night fighters were engineered to chase these targets, not match speeds with aircraft flying below their operational range. This created a fundamental physics problem. Any aircraft must maintain a minimum airspeed or literally fall from the sky. German fighters cruising at 300 mph inevitably overshot the PO2s, and slowing to 150 mph brought them dangerously close to their stall threshold of 120 mph. With PO2s operating comfortably at 80 mph and gliding silently at 60 mph, they created an untouchable zone where German interception became physically impossible. German pilots, trained extensively for high-speed pursuit and engagement, found themselves facing a precision slow-speed challenge their aircraft couldn't perform. At speed differentials exceeding 200 mph, the target acquisition window shrank to mere seconds, making weapons lock essentially impossible against the slow-moving biplanes. On April 3, 1943, during her 11th mission of the night, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage with textbook precision. While approaching a German fuel depot near Taganrog, she detected a Bf-110 night fighter by its distinctive twin-engine sound cutting through the darkness. Without hesitation, she throttled back to minimum power, reducing her airspeed to approximately 65 mph. The German pilot, clearly frustrated by her presence, made 4 separate passes at the PO2, overshooting each time despite increasingly aggressive maneuvers. His desperation became visible in the aircraft's behavior, wings wobbling dangerously as he attempted tighter turns, steep banks as he circled back for another attempt. Each unsuccessful pass gave Popova precious time to adjust her course toward the target. She completed her bombing run while the German fighter burned through its fuel reserves, attempting intercepts from constantly changing angles. This tactic, perfected over her 18 missions that remarkable night, allowed her to complete her objective despite active German attempts to stop her. By this point, 12 missions into her eventual 18-run night, she had developed an almost instinctive sense for exploiting the speed differential. German after-action reports from that night included a terse acknowledgement. Target evasion successful, despite multiple intercept attempts. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO2's greatest vulnerability: its canvas and wooden construction. The physics of bullet impacts created an unexpected paradox that reversed conventional wisdom about aircraft survivability. When bullets struck German metal aircraft, they penetrated the aluminum skin, creating shrapnel that ricocheted inside the fuselage, striking fuel lines, hydraulics, control cables, and crew members. German ammunition had been specifically designed for these metal targets, with explosive rounds and incendiary tracers optimized to create maximum internal damage after penetration. Ironically, their armor-piercing rounds actually wasted energy penetrating non-existent armor on Night Witch aircraft. When bullets struck a canvas-covered biplane, they simply passed straight through the fabric, exiting the other side without transferring significant energy or creating deadly shrapnel. Unless a round directly hit a wooden structural spar, it made a clean hole with minimal structural impact. The vital systems, engine, fuel tank, and crew, occupied only a small percentage of the aircraft's total volume, making direct hits statistically unlikely. Even substantial canvas tears had minimal effect on the PO2's already modest aerodynamics. Most critically, repairs that would ground a metal aircraft for days could be completed on PO2s in minutes, a canvas patch requiring just 30 minutes compared to metal welding requiring specialized equipment and hours of work. German pilots increasingly reported the frustrating phenomenon in their combat logs. Bullets pass through without apparent effect. Aircraft continues mission despite confirmed hits. During her eighth mission on the night of April 3, 1943, Nadezhda Popova proved this advantage definitively when her aircraft sustained concentrated fire from a German flak position. German gunners caught her POW-2 in the convergence of multiple searchlights while approaching an ammunition depot, subjecting the small biplane to intense anti-aircraft fire. Post-mission inspection revealed 26 bullet holes in the wings, 14 in the fuselage, and 2 through the tail assembly, accounting for 42 distinct impacts in a single mission. One bullet had passed directly through the cockpit area, missing Popova's head by mere centimeters, leaving only 2 small holes in the canvas as evidence of her near death. The ground crew's astonishment turned to determined efficiency as they rapidly patched the worst tears with spare canvas and doped fabric. Remarkably, the aircraft was deemed airworthy after just 40 minutes of repairs. Popova flew 6 more missions that same night in the bullet-riddled aircraft, completing her record-breaking 18 sorties before dawn. When later interviewed about the incident, she observed with characteristic understatement, "In their metal planes, I would be dead. The Germans built coffins of aluminum. We flew an aircraft that refused to kill us." But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale, creating a psychological weapon more potent than bombs. German searchlight batteries and anti-aircraft installations relied heavily on acoustic detection to locate night raiders. Their sophisticated sound-ranging equipment triangulated engine noise, allowing operators to direct searchlights and gunners to target areas. The standard defensive procedure followed a predictable sequence. Hear approaching engines, activate searchlights in that sector, commence anti-aircraft fire, and scramble night fighters if available. The Night Witches discovered a tactic, perhaps accidentally at first, that rendered this entire defensive system useless. They would approach at approximately 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle, allowing Germans to hear them coming and prepare defenses in the wrong location. Then, at roughly 3,000 feet from the target, they would completely idle their engines. The POW-2 would then glide in total silence for 5 to 6 minutes, while German defenses focused on the area where engine sounds had ceased. The physics of the POW-2 made this possible. Its glide ratio of approximately 1:10 meant it could travel 10 feet forward for every foot of altitude lost. From 3,000 feet, this created a silent gliding distance of about 30,000 feet, or 5.6 miles. At a glide speed of 60 Mach, the Night Witches could approach in ghostly silence for nearly 6 minutes. The only sound they produced was the soft rustling of wind through canvas wings, a whisper easily lost in ambient night sounds. The psychological effect on German troops was profound. Hearing bomber engines, preparing for attack, then experiencing mysterious silence, followed by unexpected explosions from a seemingly empty sky. On the night of her record 18 missions, Nadezhda Popova used this silent approach repeatedly with devastating effectiveness. During her 15th sortie, she targeted a German command post that had been proving particularly troublesome for Soviet ground forces. She approached with engines deliberately loud, climbing to 7,500 feet, high enough to be heard but difficult to spot. German defenses responded predictably, searchlights sweeping the sky in the direction of her engine noise. At precisely 3,200 feet from the target, Popova cut her engine completely. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the engine's drone had been. As she glided directly over German positions, she could actually hear soldiers calling to each other below, their voices carrying clearly in the night air. "Where are the planes? Where have they gone?" While searchlights continued sweeping empty sectors of sky, she released her bombs directly onto the command post. The explosions illuminated the upturned faces of German soldiers, still searching for an aircraft that had passed silently overhead moments earlier. Popova restarted her engine only after clearing the target area by several kilometers. She would repeat this silent approach technique on 12 of her 18 missions that night, later explaining to new recruits, "We were ghosts, they couldn't fight. They feared the silence more than the bombs. In that moment, when our engine stopped, we owned the night completely." German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality, where effectiveness was measured in missions completed and targets destroyed, rather than speed or horsepower. The Junkers Ju-88 boasted impressive specifications: 300 mph top speed, 2,400 horsepower from twin engines, radar detection systems, extensive radio equipment, armor plating, and a specialized crew of 4. Each aircraft cost approximately $80,000, equivalent to $1.3 million in 2024, required 3 months to build, and demanded precision manufacturing from skilled laborers. Yet these advanced features created significant operational limitations. A Ju-88 crew could fly a maximum of 1 to 2 sorties per night before exhaustion compromised effectiveness. Each mission required 3 to 4 hours of maintenance between flights, systems checks, refueling, rearming, and crew rest periods. Pilot fatigue accumulated rapidly as 4 men coordinated complex tasks in high-stress environments. The average operational career of a Ju-88 night fighter was between 40 to 60 missions before loss or crew rotation, with a survival rate of approximately 60%. Many were lost not to enemy action, but to weather, navigation errors, or mechanical failures. In stark contrast, the PO-2 biplanes operated with primitive specifications but superior operational tempo. Despite their 94 mph maximum speed, 100 horsepower engines, and complete lack of modern equipment, these aircraft achieved remarkable efficiency. Each PO-2 cost roughly $5,000, could be built in 3 weeks, and required minimal skilled labor. Most critically, their operational tempo dwarfed their German counterparts, capable of 8 to 18 sorties per night with total maintenance between missions taking just 7 minutes, 4 minutes for refueling, 3 minutes for reloading bombs. The 2-woman crews developed seamless coordination after hundreds of missions together. Night Witch pilots regularly accumulated 801,000 total missions, with a survival rate of 96.8%. The paradox became clear. More expensive, technologically sophisticated aircraft actually delivered lower operational effectiveness, while simpler, cheaper aircraft achieved higher operational effectiveness. What Germans viewed as technological advantage had become a logistical disadvantage. These statistics were embodied in Nadezhda Popova's operational record during her legendary night of 18 consecutive missions. Beginning at 2200 hours on April 3, 1943, and concluding at 0530 hours on April 4, she maintained an average of 25 minutes per complete mission cycle, flying to target, releasing bombs, returning to base, refueling, reloading, and launching again. Her ground crew achieved such efficiency that they consistently prepared her aircraft faster than she could walk from the debriefing tent back to the cockpit. Throughout that single night, she delivered approximately 2.7 tons of explosives across various German positions, ammunition dumps, barracks, vehicle parks, command centers, and supply depots. German casualties from her missions alone were estimated at 23 killed and 37 wounded, with material destruction valued at over 1.2 million Reichsmarks. For comparison, the most accomplished Luftwaffe night fighter pilot ever recorded flew a maximum of 4 sorties in one night, less than a quarter of Popova's achievement. By this point in the war, her record of 18 missions in a single night was becoming legendary even among German soldiers, who spoke of an unstoppable female pilot who seemed to need neither rest nor fuel. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern as 1943 progressed. The cost-benefit analysis of countering Night Witch operations was becoming increasingly unfavorable. German expenditure attempting to stop the 588th Regiment had reached staggering proportions. Over 2 million rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition specifically fired at Night Witch aircraft, at approximately 50 Reichsmarks per shell, totaling 100 million Reichsmarks, equivalent to 40 million USD. More than 1,000 dedicated fighter intercept sorties had been launched, each costing roughly 500 Reichsmarks in operational expenses, totaling another 500,000 Reichsmarks. Over 200 searchlight batteries had been deployed specifically for night defense, with approximately 5,000 personnel assigned to counter night harassment operations. The total German cost of countering Night Witch activities exceeded 150 million Reichsmarks. Meanwhile, the Soviet investment in the 588th Regiment was comparatively minimal. 40 PO2 aircraft at $5,000 each totaled just $200,000, with bombs costing a fraction of the defensive ammunition expended against them. With 80 pilots, shack navigators, and minimal ground crew, totaling 150 personnel, the entire regiment represented an investment under $2 million USD. This created a staggering cost ratio. Germans were spending 25 Reichsmarks for every 1 Reichsmark the Soviets invested in the Night Witches. Most damningly, despite this enormous expenditure, the Germans achieved 0 confirmed fighter kills on Night Witch aircraft. The 588th Regiment had created perfect asymmetric warfare, minimal investment producing maximum enemy resource drain. Nadezhda Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency in human form. If German anti-aircraft batteries fired an average of 1,000 rounds, attempting to hit her aircraft per mission, her 18 missions that night alone had drawn 18,000 rounds of valuable ammunition. At 50 Reichsmarks per round, Germans had spent approximately 900,000 Reichsmarks trying to kill one woman in one night. The result: she survived every mission while dropping bombs that destroyed an estimated 8 vehicles, 2 ammunition dumps, 1 fuel depot, and damaged a command center. The value of German material she personally destroyed that night exceeded 1.2 million Reichsmarks, meaning she had created a net positive return on investment for the Soviet war effort. For comparison, the average American bomber crew in the USAAF rotated home after completing 25 missions. Popova's 18 missions in a single night represented nearly an entire American tour of duty, completed between dinner and breakfast. She represented more combat sorties in that one night than entire squadrons of German night fighters flew in a month. Her extraordinary achievement of 18 missions in a single night while surviving 42 direct hits made her one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal, a calculation that was not lost on increasingly concerned German commanders. German high command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets. And Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German high command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation. On February 17, 1943, near Krasnodar, a Po-2 biplane suffered engine failure during a bombing run, forcing an emergency landing behind German lines. Oberleutnant Friedrich Müllerbach of the 305th Infantry Division arrived at the crash site expecting to capture standard Soviet airmen. When his patrol surrounded the damaged aircraft, 2 figures emerged with hands raised. "Remove your helmets," Müllerbach ordered in halting Russian. As they complied, his men fell silent. Standing before them were 2 young women, their long braids falling from beneath flight caps. The taller one, clearly injured but standing defiantly, identified herself as Lieutenant Marina Raskova. The navigator beside her was Junior Lieutenant Irina Sabrova. Müllerbach's initial interrogation report revealed his disbelief. Prisoners identify as Lieutenant Raskova and Navigator Sebrova, 588th Night Bomber Regiment, both female, ages 23 and 19, claim to have conducted 311 and 287 missions respectively. Prisoners display remarkable composure, refusing to provide operational details beyond name and rank. They assert their entire regiment consists exclusively of female personnel. Initially suspected disinformation tactic, but flight logs and documentation recovered from aircraft support their claims. Request immediate guidance on handling female combatants. The report reached Major Werner Klinghoffer at battalion headquarters within hours. Klinghoffer dismissed it as Soviet propaganda, a staged capture meant to embarrass German forces. "The Russians are deploying actresses," he noted in his response. "Return to standard interrogation." But within the same week, 3 separate confirmations arrived from different sectors. A downed PO-2, recovered near Maikop, contained the body of a female pilot. Documents seized during a brief occupation of a forward airstrip included duty rosters listing exclusively female names. Radio intercepts between aircraft used distinctly feminine speech patterns. By March 3rd, the report had escalated through division, corps, and finally to Army Group South headquarters, where intelligence officers compiled a comprehensive assessment. On March 10, 1943, General Lieutenant Otto Hoffmann presented findings to a room of senior Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht officers. "Gentlemen, after extensive verification, we must conclude that the 588th Night Bomber Regiment consists entirely of female personnel." The room erupted in disbelief. Hoffmann continued methodically, displaying intelligence photographs, captured documents, and cross-referenced mission reports. The same aircraft identification numbers appear in raid patterns stretching back to June 1942. Prisoner interrogations from 3 separate capture incidents corroborate these findings. He gestured to a map showing raid patterns. These are not isolated incidents or propaganda constructs. The Soviet Union has deployed an all-female combat aviation regiment against our forces, and they are responsible for the night harassment operations that have cost us millions in resources. The revelation created a crisis within Wehrmacht command structure, fracturing across psychological fault lines that exposed deeper vulnerabilities. Initial disbelief gave way to seething humiliation as the reality sank in. Elite Luftwaffe pilots with years of training and cutting-edge technology had been systematically outmaneuvered by women flying wooden training aircraft. General Ewald von Kleist reportedly stormed out of the briefing, declaring, "I refuse to believe the Führer's Luftwaffe cannot eliminate schoolgirls and crop dusters." Other officers demanded verification, then revalidation, then further confirmation, delaying tactical responses while searching for some error in intelligence that never materialized. The propaganda implications threatened to undermine carefully constructed narratives of German technological and martial superiority. How could Reich information ministries explain to the German public that their unstoppable war machine was being effectively harassed by Soviet women? The ideological conflict cut deeper still, challenging fundamental Nazi doctrine regarding women's proper roles. If Soviet women could effectively conduct combat operations, what else might German leadership be wrong about? Practical responses varied across command structures. Luftwaffe squadron commanders reported pilots requesting transfers rather than admit continued failure against female adversaries. Documents reveal a deliberate linguistic shift in official communications. Oberst Heinrich Brandt issued Operational Order 4427 on March 15, 1943. All references to enemy night bomber personnel shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender. This directive is issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may impact troop morale. Field reports increasingly used Soviet night harassment units rather than acknowledge the gender of their opponents. Yet, Frontline soldiers developed a different relationship with their unseen tormentors. The nickname Nachthexen, night witches, spread rapidly through the ranks despite official discouragement. Infantry units began requesting dedicated anti-night witch resources, with one company commander writing, "My men fear these night raids more than daytime bombers. They believe these women possess supernatural abilities to appear and disappear." Others focused solely on the tactical threat, their after-action reports clinically noting, "Enemy effectiveness remains undiminished regardless of personnel composition." While German command struggled with the revelation, Nadezhda Popova continued her missions without pause. When Germans first confirmed the 588th Regiment's composition, she had already completed 487 missions of her eventual record, including her legendary night of 18 consecutive sorties. On the very evening General-Leutnant Hoffmann was presenting his findings, Popova was leading a three-aircraft formation against a German fuel depot near Kuban. The mission destroyed 16 trucks and an estimated 20,000 liters of fuel, delaying a planned German counteroffensive by 3 days. Whether Germans knew the gender of their attackers meant nothing to Popova and her comrades. As she later told new pilots joining the regiment, "We didn't fly to prove women could fight. We flew to kill fascists. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bombs." The knowledge changed nothing operationally. The night witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners that revealed the true psychological impact of the night witches. Between 1945 and 1946, systematic interviews with captured Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe personnel included questions about Eastern Front night operations. When asked specifically about the 588th Regiment, interrogators noted a striking consistency in responses across hundreds of interviews. Even hardened SS officers displayed visible discomfort discussing the topic, shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact, or requesting cigarettes before continuing. Oberleutnant Klaus Schulz, a Ju-88 night fighter pilot captured near Minsk in July 1944, provided particularly revealing testimony. "We received orders to intercept these aircraft in September 1942. Command didn't tell us they were women. We only learned after the war ended. I attempted interception 23 times. 23 failures. The aircraft were too slow for engagement. My stall warnings would activate every time I tried to match their speed. It was humiliating. You train for years to master the Ju-88, you face British Lancaster bombers, you understand air combat. Then a wooden biplane makes you look foolish. When I learned after surrender they were women, The transcript notes a 16-second pause. I had no words. We couldn't catch them because physics wouldn't let us. Gender was irrelevant. They had beaten the laws of aerodynamics itself. Hauptmann Gerhard Fischer, who commanded a flak battery in eastern Ukraine, offered equally candid reflections. My battery fired an estimated 40,000 rounds at these aircraft between March 1943 and January 1944. We achieved perhaps 5 confirmed hits across 10 months. They would approach with engines loud. We would prepare. Then, silence. We would fire at where we thought they were. But we were shooting at ghosts. The sound would return after bombs exploded. Psychological effect on my men was severe. We feared the silence more than the bombs. Learning they were women only added to the sense that we had underestimated everything about this enemy. Analyzing hundreds of such testimonies revealed consistent patterns. Nearly universal mention of silence as the most psychologically devastating tactic. Repeated descriptions of failed interceptions due to the fundamental speed differential, and profound shock upon learning the gender of their opponents. Many attempted to rationalize the revelation through claims of Soviet propaganda, exaggerating female involvement, while others admitted more directly. It made no difference. They were effective regardless of who flew the aircraft. Variants of the phrase, "we couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed," appeared in over 60% of pilot testimonies. Perhaps most tellingly, several mentioned specific Nightwitch aircraft they had come to recognize by reputation or distinctive markings, unknowingly creating legends of their most persistent tormentors. Some testimonies referenced Nadezhda Popova specifically, though often without knowing her name. Lieutenant Wilhelm Heinz of the 257th Infantry Division provided this account. There was one aircraft we learned to recognize, had distinctive pattern of repair patches on the lower left wing and fuselage. This aircraft appeared over our positions at least twice weekly. We began calling it the Ghost because it would arrive in complete silence. I witnessed this aircraft's attacks 8 times personally. On April 17, 1943, it destroyed our ammunition depot, killing 12 men. On May 2nd, it hit our field hospital, a mistake perhaps, but devastating nonetheless. After the war, I learned from Soviet records this was likely Lieutenant Popova. She had flown over 800 missions, including 18 in a single night. We never came close to shooting her down. She was untouchable. Popova herself remained aware that Germans were capturing her comrades. 2 of her closest friends were taken prisoner in early 1944, later returning through prisoner exchanges. Their reports of interrogations focused on Germans' persistent disbelief that women could be responsible for such effective harassment. Throughout this period, Popova maintained her relentless operational tempo, completing her 42nd direct hit survival in August 1944. By war's end, she had accumulated a combat record that seemed impossible, surviving direct fire that by all conventional metrics should have been fatal, flying sortie counts that exceeded entire German squadron totals. Her 18 missions in a single night, including surviving 42 direct hits throughout her career, became documented not just in Soviet records, but in German testimonies, creating a legend that transcended propaganda on both sides. When asked after the war about German reactions to learning they fought women, she responded with characteristic directness. "We did what needed doing. Whether they respected us or feared us, or were humiliated by us was their concern. Our concern was victory." The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late. The night witches weren't anomalies or propaganda. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front, and Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Nadezhda Popova's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible. Her combat statistics remained unmatched in Soviet aviation. 852 total combat missions, including her legendary single night of 18 consecutive sorties. Over 3 years of continuous operations, she accumulated approximately 1,704 flight hours in combat conditions, most conducted in complete darkness without modern navigation equipment. Her aircraft delivered an estimated 170 tons of explosives to German positions between June 1942 and May 1945, destroying dozens of ammunition dumps, fuel depots, troop concentrations, and command posts. Most remarkably, she survived the entire war without ever being shot down, despite having her aircraft hit by enemy fire 42 times, a survival rate that defied statistical probability. For her extraordinary service, the Soviet government awarded her the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, the nation's highest honor, along with 3 orders of the Red Banner, the Order of the Patriotic War First Class, and numerous campaign medals. But beyond these formal recognitions lay the true measure of her achievement, outlasting Germany's most sophisticated defenses in an aircraft Germans considered obsolete. Her 18 missions in a single night remained an unmatched record, accomplished in conditions other pilots deemed impossible. While celebrated Soviet male aces typically completed 200–400 combat missions throughout the entire war, Popova more than doubled this figure. The human cost behind these numbers was written in her body. Years of flying in open cockpits at temperatures reaching 40 to 30 left her with permanent frostbite scars on her face and hands. Constant exposure to engine noise without hearing protection damaged her hearing. The physical toll of 852 combat sorties, approximately 28 missions per month without interruption, included sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and the cumulative stress of knowing each mission might be her last. Yet she continued flying even during the harshest Russian winters, through injuries, and despite witnessing the deaths of 32 comrades from her regiment. When asked years later how she maintained this pace, she reportedly answered, "We had no choice. Our homeland was burning." To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters. The most accomplished German night fighter pilots completed between 40 to 60 missions throughout their careers. By this standard, Popova's 852 missions represented the equivalent combat experience of 14 German aces combined. The United States Army Air Forces rotated bomber crews home after 25 missions, considering this the psychological limit of sustained combat operations. Popova's record equaled nearly 34 complete American tours of duty. Even compared to other Soviet pilots, her achievements stood apart. The average Soviet bomber pilot completed between 150–300 missions, placing Popova at least 2.8 times above the norm. The scale of her contribution becomes clearer through operational conversion. Her 852 missions translated to approximately 1,704 hours of combat flight time. If each sortie delivered an average of 200 kilograms of explosives, she personally dropped 170.4 metric tons of bombs on German positions. Intelligence estimates suggest her missions resulted in the destruction of at least 63 ammunition dumps, 82 vehicles, 17 fuel depots, and 2 headquarters facilities, causing approximately 1,200 German casualties. These figures represent more operational impact than some entire Soviet bomber squadrons achieved throughout the war. By any metric, Nadezhda Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history. And she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to deploy female combat pilots. Between May 1942 and May 1945, the regiment completed an astonishing 23,672 combat sorties, dropping over 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions. These operations resulted in an estimated 5,200 German casualties and the destruction of hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, dozens of fuel depots, and countless command posts and supply lines. Most remarkably, they accomplished this with minimal losses. Only 32 pilots and navigators killed from approximately 80 personnel, representing a 96.8% survival rate compared to the 40–60% survival rate typical for conventional Soviet bomber units. The regiment's cost-effectiveness proved equally extraordinary. The entire unit, 40 PO2 biplanes, maintenance equipment, bombs, and personnel, represented a Soviet investment of approximately $2 million. German records indicate they spent over 125 million Reichsmarks attempting to counter these nighttime raiders, creating a cost ratio of 160. For every ruble the Soviets invested, the Germans spent 60 trying to nullify the threat. Most tellingly, despite this enormous expenditure, the Luftwaffe failed to achieve a single confirmed aerial kill of a Night Witch aircraft. Nearly all losses came from ground fire, not air combat. The ultimate validation of the stall speed paradox that had rendered German fighters ineffective against the slow-moving biplanes. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value the Night Witches delivered to the Soviet war effort. Their psychological impact on German troops created cascading operational effects. Sleep deprivation led to poor decision-making, which increased casualties in daytime operations. The harassment tied down over 5,000 German soldiers in air defense roles who might otherwise have served on the front lines. Supply line disruptions forced Germans to adopt longer, more vulnerable routes, increasing fuel consumption and exposure to partisan attacks. The propaganda value proved equally significant. Demonstrating that Soviet women could effectively fight alongside men boosted civilian morale and industrial production. Perhaps most significantly, the regiment exposed fundamental flaws in German intelligence and doctrine. The assumption that technological superiority guaranteed battlefield dominance was devastatingly undermined. Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly noted in his memoirs, "The Night Witches achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering. Nadezhda Popova's 852 missions and survival through 42 direct hits embodied this principle. After the war ended, Nadezhda Popova faced a different kind of challenge, returning to civilian life after 3 years of nightly combat operations. Initially celebrated with the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, participation in victory parades, and official recognition, she, like many veterans, struggled with the transition to peace. She continued in aviation, becoming a flight instructor at the Mikhail Raskovoy Higher School for Pilots, where she trained a new generation of Soviet aviators. In 1949, she married fellow pilot Semyon Kharlamov, a decorated Soviet air hero, and eventually had a son. Unlike many veterans who rarely discuss their wartime experiences, Popova occasionally spoke at military academies and schools about the Night Witches' tactics. She maintained close relationships with surviving squadron mates, participating in annual reunions until her death. The Soviet government awarded her multiple decorations beyond her wartime medals, including the Order of Lenin and Order of October Revolution. Her hometown of Donetsk established a small museum exhibition honoring her achievements. However, like many Soviet war heroes not personally favored by Stalin, her recognition fluctuated with the political climate. During periods of Stalinist repression, the Night Witches' achievements were downplayed in official histories, only to be revived during later Soviet leadership. Nadezhda Popova died on July 8, 2013, at the age of 91 in Moscow. By then, she had lived long enough to see her regiment's story gradually emerge from obscurity into global recognition. For decades, the Night Witches remained virtually unknown in the West. During the Cold War, their story was either suppressed entirely or dismissed as Soviet propaganda, an ideological impossibility rather than documented history. Only with the glasnost period of the 1980s did Western researchers gain access to Soviet military archives containing operational records of the women's regiments. Throughout the 1990s, as former barriers fell, historians began documenting the Night Witches' achievements, cross-referencing Soviet records with captured German reports that validated their effectiveness. By the early 2000s, books and documentaries began bringing their story to Western audiences, revealing what had been hidden for half a century. German prisoner testimonies, finally declassified, confirmed what Soviet accounts had long claimed: the devastating psychological impact of these night raiders and the Luftwaffe's inability to counter them effectively. The story that emerged wasn't propaganda, but documented history, supported by multiple independent sources. Modern recognition has grown steadily since. The Russian Air Force Museum in Monino features a permanent exhibition on the women's regiments. Monuments stand in several Russian cities, including a striking memorial in Rostov-on-Don depicting Night Witch pilots in flight gear. Streets bearing the names of regiment members can be found throughout former Soviet territories. Films, books, and documentaries continue bringing their story to new generations, with Nadezhda Popova's 18-mission night and survival through 42 direct hits often highlighted as exemplifying the regiment's extraordinary resilience. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering universal lessons that remain relevant decades later. About warfare, they demonstrated that asymmetric tactics can defeat even the most advanced technology when applied intelligently. Their psychological impact often exceeded their physical damage. German soldiers feared what they couldn't see or predict more than conventional bombing raids. Innovation consistently outperformed resources as their silent, gliding approach proved more effective than sophisticated targeting systems. About underestimation, the Germans' assumptions regarding both gender and aircraft primitiveness created a catastrophic blind spot. Their prejudice opened vulnerabilities that might otherwise have been addressed. The Night Witch's experience validates a timeless military principle. Never dismiss a threat based on preconceptions, as your enemy's apparent weakness may become their greatest strength when properly exploited. About determination, Popova's 852 missions required extraordinary resilience, each sortie bringing the possibility of death. The physical conditions alone, open cockpits in Russian winter, no parachutes, constant anti-aircraft fire, would have broken many pilots. Yet night after night, she returned to the sky, demonstrating how human will can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. About physics and engineering, the PO2's canvas construction proved superior to metal when facing specific threats, while the stall speed paradox transformed a technical limitation into tactical advantage. The Night Witches showed that the right tool isn't always the most advanced. Sometimes it's the one best adapted to specific operational requirements. On April 3, 1943, when Nadezhda Popova climbed into her PO2 for what would become her record-breaking 18 missions in a single night, she represented everything German commanders had dismissed as impossible. The officers who had laughed at women in crop dusters never understood what she and her sisters in the 588th Regiment ultimately proved: that determination makes technology secondary, that innovation overcomes resources, and that underestimation is the deadliest mistake in warfare. Her 852 missions and survival through 42 direct hits weren't just statistics. They were proof that the Germans had calculated everything except the human variable. In wooden biplanes that physics said shouldn't work, against defenses engineered to stop them, the Night Witches demonstrated that sometimes the most lethal weapon isn't the most sophisticated. It's the one your enemy refuses to believe exists until it's already overhead.